What is allodium? So allodium is a word that has a definition. I found it through a long series of connections and investigations and many rabbit holes in order to even discover the word. And once discovered, I have championed the word allodium. What does it mean? It means owned absolutely by occupation and defense without any fealty, acknowledgement of any overlord. So direct ownership. It is essentially the opposite of feudalism. So feudalism is where all of it's a hierarchy of taxation, and at the top of the hierarchy is the Pope, which is essentially the central power system at that time, above the kings that could crown kings or unseat other ones and start and create wars, or I'm totally blanking. What's it called when they send a whole bunch of people over to the other place? It's like a jihad, but a Christian version. Anyways, I'm totally blanking. So, allodium what is that called? Crusade, right? Crusade. Sorry, I almost got totally lost. I was questioning everything. So I'm definitely not going to post this. All these things, I'm wasting people's time. But sometimes there's difficulty. And if we don't get through the difficulty and just sit in the truth of it, then we won't get anywhere. So might as well just carry on. So allodium is a state of being. It's a state of being in which there are no authorities, no other earthly authorities anyhow. And it's a state of direct stewardship of the land and responsibility for one's local geography, territory. Did you know that in the modern world, it's essentially impossible for anyone to own land? Even people who think they own land, they pay taxes on that land. So the taxes are essentially the rent. So because if they don't pay the taxes, then the land gets foreclosed on. The only people who actually can claim to be living rent-free, to have free parking, are essentially the royals and the religious institutions. The religions are exempt from taxation, as are the royals, because they're at the level of enacting those systems of oppression. Allodium represents the individual's home, property, estate, their domain, their castle, and if everyone claimed their home as their allodium overnight, the central banks would cease to exist as parasites upon the people. That's not really true. It wouldn't happen overnight. It would have to be an ongoing thing, because the next day people would still be using the same currency. They would have to switch their currency overnight to like crypto or some other form of exchange. But essentially the point is that if everyone stopped funding and following the orders, funding the order followers, funding the parasites themselves, then that system wouldn't go on. But the reality is that it exists because that's basically human nature. That's where we are now. And for those of us who would like to create something better, it requires intent, action, communication, teamwork, collaboration, cooperation, symbiosis. So what I'm doing here, why it is infinitely valuable relative to my value system, why it's more valuable than any money or my life, is because I have claimed my own Allodium. I've settled this land, and I have created a revolution within my own area of responsibility. So the land which I'm responsible for is free from taxation, is free from oppression, and is stewarded in the way which I am responsible for, and which that's all. That's what I'm. It's interesting. Being responsible for something, it can be a synonym with both a burden and pride. So if there's something that's good and you say you're responsible for that, it's like pride, like I'm proud of that thing. But if you say there's a responsibility, it seems like that's a burden, that responsibility. So I realize that I used the word meaning the first, and then I wanted to mean the latter second, and it was just the same word. So I intend to lead by example. It's the only effective way of leading, really. And there's always the potential that I am made an example of by those who would not like the example that I set. And that's the wages of life are death. So if we fear death, then what value has our life? We would always just make choices based off of our aversion to death. But if death is accepted as a guarantee for each one, then what's logical is to choose how to maximize one's life, the value of one's life, and to value those values independently of any other value system, which some others might try to value for us. Other values others might try to value for us. Wow, that was a tough one, but I couldn't really think of what else to say, but I guess that's what I meant to say. So I can't start over like if I can't start over what I'm doing now. Like for that to happen, it would invalidate. It would just like a blockchain. It's like you can't just start over the blockchain because that's like a whole new chain. The whole point of the blockchain is that the longer the chain, the more valuable it has because it's the proof of work over time. It's the exact same thing here. That there would be no point for me to start over in another place because this is the whole like realization of the fruition of my life. So if the fulfillment, if the conclusion of that is not in alignment with my intent, and that's the outcome, then that's the example that is made of me, if I'm subject to such, or if not, and I'm truly free, then that's the example that I set. So the dynamics of force are always at play in the world, and one must not underestimate the power of the dark side. And the more I age, the more I understand the wisdom of all of these different stories, which I suppose we're privileged to be brainwashed and inspired also, and programmed with. And ideally, the good ones stick around, and the bad ones, conflicting ones, fade. And that's something that is a good value metric. That which transcends time has value. So certain ideas transcend time. Some structures transcend time. Obviously, the pyramids transcend time. I felt pride, and then I reverted the previous extrapolation from pride to responsibility. And the reality is that all past lives, like drops of rain that have fallen and have returned to the ocean, the experience of each raindrop is embodied in the wholeness of the ocean. It's not lost in the ocean. So the ocean always exists, and even when we're separate from all, the all continues to exist, and we can relate with it in many different ways, and with different outcomes varying depending upon the intent. So circling back to Allodium, 2 pi is a full rotation, and 1 pi is oftentimes the half-life of the full cycle, and I don't often plan it. But to say that this is going to go for about 12 more minutes seems a bit of a preclusion. I used that word in another video incorrectly, and then I had to look it up. Sometimes I just use words and I don't even know what they mean, and usually I use them right, but I think I used that one wrong. But maybe I used it right, but I just used it right that time. I'm precluding it, potentially, unless it doesn't, and then it finally concludes at the proper time. What would it look like for Allodium to scale? What is Allodium? So how did I found this word? This word has this resonance and epic meaning. It's been erased from the lexicon, and I've discovered it, and I've had to bring it back. So I've named a cooperative, a sovereign state named Allodium. I have renamed myself as being of Allodium. That's my last name, is Of-Allodium, because I am of Allodium. It's the state of being of which I am of. The the judge in the federal court, last time I was in the federal court, under the one I was employing him. I, for some reason, wanted to add that, but he didn't know how to address me. He was like, what do I call you? Of-Allodium. And then he was asking me for my pronoun. I was like, yeah, you can call me Sovereign. He's like, well, usually we call you by your last name. So should I call you Mr. Of-Allodium? And I was like, you can call me Sovereign Of-Allodium if you don't want to say. Or first I was like, no, I just go by Non. And he's like, well, I'm not going to call you Non. I call you Mr. And then he ended up calling me, I think he ended up calling me Mr. Of-Allodium, but the stenographer called me Non. So it was a break between the two. She respected my truth, and the judge existed on a plane of delusion above. And also, anyways. So Allodium, it's got me unraveling because it's so magnificent. What would it look like if, first of all, if everyone understood what it meant, if everyone claimed their own individual sovereignty and their own Allodium, the entire world would be free. That would be amazing. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think it could happen eventually, especially if there are positive examples of that. So far, it's positive here, but oftentimes in my interactions, I seem kind of negative. So I got to change my way of communicating with the rest of the world and be more positive and less critical. But I think that's actually a reflection of I'm so critical of myself, and then to turn that around to other people is inappropriate. So I just got to be like, I can be critical of myself to help myself learn, but still just be positive in relation to everyone else, because it's inappropriate to apply the standards I apply to myself to everybody else. Allodium the cooperative is a sovereign state lawfully formed from vacant country out of the country of Vermont. The reason that took me so long to say is because there's a lot of like specifics as far as like jurisdictions and where a thing originates, and then the legal aspect of a state of being and how things exist. Like there's so many rabbit holes to go into, and most people, like, you don't even want to deal with it. So I won't go down there. But I've been down there. I just don't want to go down there now. It's hours of. It's like there's different languages when you get into all these different specialities, whether it's technology or law or science or mathematics or fashion or art or collectibles. It becomes like a different language where it's difficult to understand without getting immersed in it. So I haven't learned other languages other than just a little Spanish in high school, but I feel like I've learned these other languages of trying to understand like what is Bitcoin. I feel like that was a whole new language to learn. As well as the legal dimension and jurisdiction, and what is a state, what is a country, what is the legal basis upon which all of these institutions exist? How do we exist in relation to these institutions? Are we subject to them? Are they subject to us? Like, how does everything exist? And things turn over through time, and we have these turnings, like when the country started. And when I say that, I mean the constituted country, whether in 1777 or 1777, Vermont was constituted, as were the United States of America. Not going to go into a history lesson. We're talking about allodium here. It's all rooted in history and the reality. But how does allodium? So here's a little bit about allodium. Its scaling model is essentially. So the symbol of allodium, the triangle, the orange triangle that represents the Allodial Foundation. So OG Foundation is the first Allodial Foundation of Allodium that represents basically a community center and support center, essentially, for the sovereigns of Allodium. So, and the reason it's orange is because orange is the color of basically nurturing. And so the foundation is meant to be a place that supports people. So that would be where you would have child services and schooling and resources and all sorts of community things, enterprises connected, and also the capacity to produce the necessities for thriving communities. So housing for people, the resources that people require, and commodities for trade. So everything's grown out of a seed. And the seed was planted in me, a seed of collective consciousness. I don't know what year that would have been. I guess it would have been 2008 or 9, where it was a certain experience, and it was an experience of a seed of collective consciousness and consciously accepting this seed. And at some point over many months, that seed germinated, and then it split open, and then where there was one, there became many. And the path laid out can be narrow at times for time is relative, and the choices in the present moment might not align with the higher ideals. And we can hold ourselves to account to prevent ourselves from straying too far from our own course. And that course led me from what seemed like a paradise in Colorado towards that whole reality collapsing, a reality of an sort of an ideal singularity, an alpha wavelength state of being, which collapsed into a multitude of chaos and confusion, trials and tribulations. However, eventually that seed, after migrating, that germinating seed found root in this here fertile soil. And for years I have been sinking my roots deep like a tree, preparing for a life reaching for the skies and sustaining life on the limbs and branches and detritus. What is Allodium? Allodium is a man's realization of an ideal realized through a collective consciousness reflection, in order to integrate a way that realizes the ideal within this life without necessitating the influence of any others, and simply following my own course, so that should I succeed upon this journey, the fruits of my labors shall be a foundation which is free, which is not compromised, which has no earthly overlords, which fosters a culture of sovereign individuals empowered to their maximum potential. And causes these responsible, empowered individuals to reculture the land, to steward it to health in a time frame which is multi-generational, as the people who lived on this land before it was colonized, as they thought, and their degree of responsibility and stewardship for the land and their communities. So that's 2 pi right there. That's full circle and block complete. I'll talk to you guys on another day.